Thank you all for joining in on this session of DORA and ICT incident reporting. This session, we are joined with our with a partner of ours, Latham Watkins, who we've been working with from a long period of time. So we'll shortly do the introductions for both the organizations. We will give a couple of minutes for people to join in, and we will be recording this session for people who have joined and their colleagues have not been able to join. The slides text also will be made available post this session. So enjoy the session, keep it interactive. We'll have a lot more polls. We will also be monitoring tracks. So if you have any immediate comments or feedback or questions, put it on the chat. It's been monitored and we'll look to address all of them during the session. If not, we'll come back to you later through email. So while we are waiting, a quick introduction for people who have joined in and are not yet aware about Thomas Murray. Thomas Murray has been in business for over 30 odd years. They have traditionally provided risk intelligence services within the financial sector, specifically in post-trade, where they've performed assessments of market infrastructures across 140 odd countries and correspondence monitoring and likes of sub-custodian and cash monitoring for multiple banks. So they are a well-known entity within the financial service industry in the post-trade space, and they have embarked on a cyber advisory journey where me and James are part of, and we kind of work with each other. James focuses on incident response, I focus on GRC. So that was a short introduction of the organization for people who didn't know. James Lloyd, while we're waiting, do you want to give a brief introduction to the audience who've plugged in about Latham Watkins?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Riji. Good to join you guys. So yeah, Latham Watkins is a leading global law firm. We have some, I think, 3,500 more lawyers in offices across the world's major financial business reg hubs. And we provide strategic counsel in a wide range of areas, from corporate transactions, litigation, and reg compliance. For my part, I'm in the privacy and cyber group, where we have around 150 lawyers counseling clients on all that good stuff. But of course, that includes DORA and incident reporting.
Amazing. Thanks, James. So I am a director within the Thomas Murray cybersecurity practice or the cyber risk practice. I focus mostly on GRC. So DORA is very close to what I am doing from a day-to-day operations and work point of view. We do have two James. James Lloyd, who's a partner within Latham Watkins, and he just introduced the organization. And we have James Thoburn, who's a colleague of mine. James, do you want to quickly do a short introduction, and then we get this session kicking off?
I guess that's me, James T.
Yes. Sorry, we have two James. I'm going to refer to you as James and James Lloyd as James Lloyd.
All right, that works. Thank you very much, Rudy. Yeah, so as it was touched on a little bit earlier, I'm a director in the cyber risk practice here at Thomas Murray, leading as the head of digital forensics, incident response, expert services, and by proxy of that, threat intelligence. So usually helping clients when they're in distress with some sort of incident or event, but also helping to get better prepared for those things. So looking at incident response plans, looking at things like tabletop exercises, those sorts of engagements. Being with the firm about 18 months now, and been involved in the industry in terms of digital forensics and incident response for about 14 years or so, various places in the private sector. Yeah, that's a short introduction, and I'll hand over to James Lloyd.
Thanks, James. Yeah, so I'm James Lloyd. I'm a partner at Latham Watkins in, as I said, the cyber and privacy group. Spend a lot of my time counseling clients on incident preparedness and dealing with the consequences when things go wrong, which it means dealing with regulatory notifications, investigating incidents, corresponding litigation associated with those incidents, and increasingly seeing a lot more preparedness work in respect of NIS2, the Cyber Resiliency Act, AI as well as a big feature. But in broad terms, yeah, a lot of focus on incident reporting.
Amazing. So we do have great speakers and during this session who have experienced within the incident reporting space. So hope you enjoy. For people who know about the typical format we have and have joined multiple times, a quick poll as to understand where you are joining us from, which part of the European member states you're joining from, UK or US. Please do come in. It gives us a sense of the demographics that joins us. And we are able to sometimes better correlate some of the poll questions or questions coming from you, sir. So please do participate or keep this on. This is there are multiple options, so it's a difficult choice. Why people are putting that thing is response engine. We have people from Austria, Croatia, Denmark, Ireland, Latvia, Romania, a lot of others, which is, I'm assuming, either US or somewhere in Asia. I hope we've not missed any European member states. We do have a lot of people from the UK also. So pretty diverse set of people joining in. I'm assuming they are somehow either wanting to learn from DORA or actively, impacted by the DORA regulations. The second poll that we usually do is to get a better understanding of what kind of industry and subsector you are from. Okay. Yeah. So again, a diverse mix of third parties to EMIs to management companies to CSDs, insurers also. So again, quite diverse mix. So we then get to what we're gonna cover for today. I think just kind of, since DORA is now applicable, we do a short kind of short kind of overview of where we are, what we see from various regulations. So GDPR, NIS2 from an incident reporting point of view, and how DORA reporting is a bit different from them. Then we go to what are the actual reporting requirements from a DORA point of view. What have we heard various competent authorities say about incident reporting, and what do we recommend for the audience that have joined it? So fairly quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. We are already there. DORA is applicable. Though there are few ICT incident related regulatory text that have not been formally adopted by the European Commission. Which is mostly in the space of incident reporting. We just wanted to see on, has this impacted your organization ability to be prepared for the Jan 17th? Hey, oops, sorry, I was told you did not see the presentation. Apologies for that. Is it now?
Yeah.
James?
It's very tricky. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, super. I'm not sure what happened. Apologies for all. So while you answer to the poll question, it was mostly around a couple of regulatory texts not being formalized. Has this kind of formal adoption by the EC impacted your preparedness for the ICT incident management requirements? Admin Ravi, Admin, is the poll live? I don't see poll being live. All right, I'll move on just in the interest of time. The poll was ended. So we just, on the interest of the time, we kind of skip that. We come to views from various regulations. James, you want to chip in on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think what we're looking at with DORA that is going to be a little bit different compared to other regulatory regimes is that it's much broader and it goes back further from what you might have expected to have considered under something, say, like GDPR. So when you're looking at having to have the correct level of granular detail on how you're detecting, how you're classifying, and then ultimately how you're reporting, what that means is that there's going to be greater expectation eventually on what should be in those reports. So what are you going to cover and what you're not going to cover? And does that align with what you should have had in place? So if, and this is purely from a technical perspective, or at least my point of view, when you looked at things like GDPR, you were looking at it from the perspective of data and the controls that are in place or might not be in place. When you're looking at something like DORA, it's, well, about the resilience of the organization. So what do you have in place before then? Because this whole regulation is around putting you in a better place to hopefully not have these incidents happen. So what did you do before that to try and mitigate that risk? I think that's a big difference. I think the other thing potentially, when we get onto looking at the criticality and severity of systems and data, you could be under some really quite strict timelines, which means that you need to be able to put your hand on data and therefore answers pretty quickly, maybe a lot faster than you've ever been used to. And that's something that a lot of organizations might not have ever considered as to how would you do that? How would you be able to go and find the answers to the questions that you need to provide answers to within potentially 4 hours? That's really quite a short time frame. That's kind of my initial viewpoint on it is some of the key differences. I think it's going to be a challenge, but I think it's something that's needed, particularly in the financial services space.
Yeah. And what are thoughts, James, around learnings that organizations could take from the GDPR regime?
Yeah, I think some of the things like pretty clearly that we'd have learned over the years is that when you get to the point that you have to escalate and report, you don't want that to be the first time that you practice it. You don't want it to be when the house is on fire, right? You don't want to have to be doing that for the first time when you are trying to manage an incident, you're trying to manage third parties, you're trying to manage customer expectations. So having those workflows already in place, practice, almost muscle memory is really, really important, and getting external validation on that as well. Not just what you think, but what does somebody who's been in the trenches with many other organizations from many other sectors, what do they think about those workflows? Do they actually stand up? Do they pass the test? Then collaboration is key, because when you're looking at resilience across a business, well, it's across the business, right? You're going to have multiple different departments who are going to need to come together to answer critical questions and perform key actions in a very short space of time. And that's one of the things that we definitely, from my view, from the trenches, that from the early days of responding to incidents that might have had some involvement in terms of being having to report for something like GDPR, that was something that was a real struggle in the very early days. And over time, people began to understand it. They began to get that actually this is something where we all need to chip in, we all need to have a hand on it, and we all need to work together and come together to be able to meet these tight deadlines. Then from a technical perspective, I think things have got a lot better from compliance tools and other software solutions. This is not to say that you shouldn't obviously use the inherent knowledge in the business from individuals, but there are tools out there now that can streamline a lot of this process, can help you identify what's critical, what might be sensitive, how do you manage those things, what's the current status of them. And then lastly, which for me is possibly the most important point, is to practice is to make sure that you're going through these exercises well before, as I said earlier, well before the house is on fire. Make sure that you've gone through it, you learn from that, crucially with external parties who can give you another viewpoint that isn't your own. Because if you're only marking your own homework, you might have a tendency to say that you're always getting a star, and that might not necessarily be the case. So I think there's lots of things that we can learn, particularly from what we've experienced over the last however many years it is now, from having to deal with incidents as a result of reporting for GDPR. There's an awful lot we can learn.
Yep. Amazing. And James Lloyd, from your point of view, from a legal point of view, are you also kind of seeing those differences, those nuances, difference in terms of incident reporting from the various regulatory regimes that already existed for incident reporting? And how do you foresee that organizations could learn from GDPR, or NIS was already there, so even from NIS reporting?
Right. Yeah. I really like the point that James just made in terms of the clear workflows. I think what GDPR did primarily is to put businesses under that time pressure. And so really emphasize, not that you didn't really have it during an incident already in terms of time pressure. Inevitably you want to ensure containment, you want to get the business operationally stood back up again. But fundamentally, if you're up against those timelines, it really focuses the mind. It's not that I disagree with James, but in some respects, I feel like actually there are relatively few lessons to learn from GDPR with DORA, just because, again, to James's point, it's so broad. With GDPR, you had this focus on personal data. There's no personal data involved, there's no obligation to report, but you wouldn't generally know that until much later in the incident. Whereas here with DORA, of course, covering all ICT disruptions, whether or not they involve personal data, even an isolated system outage might need to be reported. As James says, like trying to cobble together the details for the purpose of that report is going to be complex, and it's going to be very time consuming. And so I completely agree with James. I mean, the lesson to kind of take away from this, and I think what we will see more of, is the importance of practice, and refining those workflows, and just recognizing, frankly, that if you're in this space, and DORA applies to you, then you are up against it when it comes to tight timelines, and managing that process is not going to go well if you haven't practiced it.
Yeah. All right. No, I think a fair, indeed, from you kind of summarized it well, where there could be some learnings from GDPR, but not every piece of it could be replicated purely because of the scope being vastly different. So that is one aspect of how DORA notification requirements is different, because GDPR, you could possibly take time to make an assumption of whether personal data has been impacted or not, and then delay the regulatory reporting while there is a forensic investigation being undertaken to determine the scope of the attack. Whereas in case of DORA, I think that is a bit different, because like you say, every ICT asset is in scope, and if it belongs to critical and important functions, then you have to report it. So that apart from that, is there other significant difference from a DORA reporting point of view? James Lloyd, I'll first come to you, and then I'll go to James.
Yeah, I think probably the key difference is in the specificity. So with GDPR, the test as to whether it creates this risk to individuals, lawyers can have a heyday with that, and I do. That's my job. But with DORA, it's much more tightly defined. Various categories that will actually prompt notification requirements, are clearly set out. Now, obviously, I think there's inevitably going to be some ambiguity there, and it's also going to be that ambiguity is going to be compounded by those early days of an incident. As we all know, the first 24, 72-hour period is it's a firestorm, and people are running around like headless chickens and trying to figure out what's gone wrong. So, yeah, there are tight timelines. I still think, to your point, Sriji, there will be an opportunity to, when you're thinking about the timelines, to defensively take the position, look, when did you become aware? Fundamentally, when did you have that knowledge? When were you fixed with that knowledge such that you actually concluded it was a major incident and had to make that report? Again, that's one of those things that lawyers, it comes very naturally. But I don't think you necessarily want to be having that argument during a live incident, right? These are the sorts of things that, again, to James's earlier point, if you're practiced in them, you should be pretty familiar with what the triggers are going to be and who in your organization you need to be drawing on to figure out whether those triggers are indeed met.
Yeah. I don't think I fully align on that. James, from your point of view, more looking at non-legal aspects or operationally responding to an incident. What are your thoughts in this?
There are challenges, definitely, when it comes to the granularity and detail that you're going to have to provide. Considering those things ahead of time is going to be key. Like, how would you gather the right level of information? Have you gone through those processes beforehand? Because if you haven't, you might find that processes you thought would take a couple of hours might actually in reality take days. And that's going to impact your ability to be able to get data and ultimately report. The other interesting part is, and I think it's quite topical, particularly over the last few years, is third parties. So supply chain risk is still absolutely massive. How do you get a handle on all of the third parties that you might interact with, the level of access that they have to your organization, and what could be the impact from that? And that's really quite a difficult thing to get a proper handle on. I think that could be one of the key challenges that we see organizations get to grips with.
Indeed. So we've seen, there are few pros and cons of leveraging understandings of other regulatory regimes. From the people who've joined us, what are their thoughts? Have the organization spent more time in preparing the reporting requirements or incident reporting or processes from a DORA point of view than the other regulatory regimes that are there from an incident reporting? How? Yeah, we most of them are in agreement. Yeah, we have somewhere around 40% that believes yes, but prior regulatory incident reporting helps. So they do believe there is some sort of learning that, from a culture point of view, it's easier from an organization to kind of then achieve DORA requirements. So I think it does make sense. But we have like around 27% out of there are a few people who have not responded, but a significant amount has responded to positive. So I think kind of concur with what we've spoken so far. Now we've spoken a lot about those DORA requirements, and let us just see what these DORA requirements are. We are putting audience to work again very quickly. We just want to, from the preparedness point of view, hope it never happens. But if there was an incident, how confident are you from reporting obligations point of view? Just a sense check. Well, surprisingly, there are a significant amount of organization. I think the most number of organizations think they have work to do, which is sort of good because they know what they have to work on. So they've kind of identified what needs to be done, which is already great. But we do have a number of organizations providing inputs on that. I think it's kind of, we could not corroborate it with the earlier poll where the regulatory reporting requirements were not yet finalized. And only now we are getting communication around how incidents are to be reported. So I think it does make sense. Now let's look at those requirements. So for people, just to kind of get them on the same page as where we are, we've spoken a bit about how the regulatory regime, incident reporting regime is a bit different from the previous other regulatory regime. So from a classification requirement point of view, as James Lloyd was alluding to, the scope is full ICT assets. Now, if we were to look at, the reporting is for major incident reporting, and there are two ways in which an incident could be categorized as major. One is where if there is any successful, malicious, unauthorized access to network and information system that impact critical or important functions. So if there are network and information systems that are mapped to your critical and important functions, it automatically qualifies as a major incident. So at your end, you may consider this even a P3 incident, but because it impacts critical and important function, this has to be qualified as major. So those are the small nuances depending on how you classify your internal incidents already. The priority P3 was just an example. So that's one way. The second way is there are multiple criterions, and two or more criterion have to be met. And again, going back to what James Lloyd was mentioning, there is detailed guidelines on what the criterion should be, what are the parameters, what are the thresholds for each one of them. So DORA has laid those down in quite a number of detail. But these are the two ways in which an incident could be categorized as a major, which then warrants the notification. And the notification timeline are 4 hours. So once the incident is classified as 4 hours, it goes into the reporting of within 4 hours. Though there are not, this initial notification is not that stringent from a data point of view. You could still, kind of get away with giving, answers that you are not aware of, and you could kind of indicate the same here, because obviously everyone appreciates that you're still investigating the incident to provide all the data. The challenge, I believe, somewhere gets to when it becomes a 72-hour intermediate notification. So basically you could technically get around 4 days to report this intermediate notification once there is the classification as major incident. Here, the notification templates provide for a lot of data fields. There are few data fields that, if it is not tested and not kind of you don't have identification of stakeholders who's going to provide that input and how the stakeholder is going to gather that data, there could be some struggle in populating that. One of the things is, number of financial counterparties impacted. Again, that is something that we foresee as a challenge. I've spoken to a number of organizations that either see as a challenge, or they think we are going to do an estimation, we have a way to estimate it, and we're going to provide an estimation. The other is a reputational risk assessment. Now, this is also something I believe organizations would have to put in place on top of already an ICT risk assessments if they already don't have it. So if there are already frameworks and methodology to make that assessment, that is great. But if not, this is one area where organizations have to work towards to arrive at the reputational risk.
I think this is where, having dealt with incidents in the past where there's been potentially a requirement to notify, this is probably where I would look for that external legal advice, and probably where I would bring someone in, particularly like James Lloyd, to give that advice, because you'll be potentially looking at this from the first time that you've ever had to do one of these. Someone like James has been well in the trenches of having to go through many similar things time and time again. And there can be a risk of over notifying or under notifying and giving not enough information and too much information. I guess I'll probably bring you in there, James, because that's something that I've seen you work through time and time again, and see what your thoughts are on that, really.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it certainly helps to go through that process lots and lots of times. Not for my mental health, but yeah, if anything, for the client's benefit. I think those are great points. Experience matters, but so does insight. And so one of the things that I quite often do as well is, and particularly with something like DORA, depends where you're notifying, right? Like fundamentally, there's no one-stop shop here. Like you might be notifying in any one, depending on where your organization is based. You need that local expertise. So we will regularly reach out to local counsel, coordinate that advice to make sure that we're getting the right information when it comes to what that local competent authority will expect. That really matters because, ultimately, if they're going to come back and ask for more, if you're going to expect pushback, all of that you can factor into your drafting. I think one of the things, just when Shriji was talking, that I was thinking of that I'd be interested in your thoughts, Shriji and James as well, is like, to what extent do you think, like where I see the rubber meeting the road with some of those factors that you were describing, so the two factors equaling notification, major incident, it involves a number of different stakeholders, right? Like fundamentally, like figuring out whether there has been damage to reputation, you're going to have, legal and risk, comms in there. Obviously, data loss is a whole other different analysis, economic impact, like how you go about sort of figuring that out from an ops perspective. What are your thoughts just in terms of how you kind of coalesce? Because I think, on the GDPR side, it's relatively straightforward. It's like, oh, we need some privacy folks and, we need InfoSec. But with DORA, it's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah. So, James, if what I have seen organizations do is piggyback on their existing incident reporting processes to kind of get to the criterion piece. So, I've seen organizations who say if it's a P1, automatically always assess for the criterions and see whether it's major reporting. So they have kind of, said based on their existing incident prioritization, they've determined which one of them qualifies for this check, and they have a different designated person to make that assessment. So it's not your traditional incident responder giving this. It's someone outside of that has business understanding to kind of look into it and then make a call to say whether this requires DORA related incident reporting, yes or no. So at least that is what I have seen a lot of clients adopt, which I think should work. At least this is one of the best practice I have come across. James?
I think I would take it back to the incident response plan. Go back to that and look at how you define an incident. How do you triage an event to figure out it becomes an incident, and what are the triggers that you're using in that? They shouldn't just be technical, certainly when you're looking at something at the scope of this. But take about the incident response plan and make sure that you're identifying who should be responsible for what and what roles they should have in that process, and considering the whole range of, what's the potential financial impact alongside what's the technical impact from service availability and all that type of stuff. Make sure that it's ingrained in the incident response plan, because that comes back around to the point I made earlier on about practicing, testing and testing, so that you can make sure that you're constantly improving those processes. You constantly understand what an incident is, what the severity of it is, and what triggers you might have met in regards to various regulations. So yeah, I go all the way back to the fundamentals of the incident response plan and make sure that you're updating that and then looking forwards.
Super. So there could be more intermediate notification that the competent authority may ask the organizations to provide between 10 and the 30th day, and at the 30th day you have to provide a final report which has again a number of data points that are required. Some of it is fairly obvious, some of it might be challenged depending on how those various departments, those teams that James Lloyd alluded before, have been involved in designing the workflows that you have currently. So the strength of your notification would kind of depend on multiple factors. One of them is how integrated or cross-department involvement is there in kind of preparing this notification and sending it out. Now, we've laid down a few challenges that we believe exist in the incident reporting. We'd like to hear your thoughts in kind of what do you foresee your organization's challenges when it comes to incident reporting and notification. I think one of the key aspects that we've not yet spoken about is and this is where I kind of also look to James Lloyd, and hopefully we kind of see from the poll questions is, suppose there is a data breach which leads to personal data breach, and it relates to also critical and important function, then it has to be reported at a GDPR level and also at the DORA level. Now, when such dual reporting exists, how are organizations kind of geared to deal with this? Or from your point of view, James Lloyd, because you would be put under pressure by the clients to kind of provide guidance. So how do you foresee this challenge?
Yeah, it is a challenge, right? Like if you're juggling multiple regulatory reporting regimes, and with here different timing expectations, different triggers, it creates complexity, and that is in an already ambiguous situation. So trying to figure out what the right strategy is hard to do. There is no kind of easy answer on this, to be honest. Like every incident is different. The facts vary. And so you really do have to roll with it. Again, it comes back to the practice and experience point. All of that stuff is valuable. I think if I can give sort of one takeaway, it's that especially where personal data is concerned and making notifications under GDPR, it's about just taking a beat on that. Yeah, I mean, everybody fixates on the 72-hour period, and they're right to. But ultimately, it's about reasonable certainty that that data has actually gone and has been compromised in some way. And reasonable certainty, as I say, during an incident is a hard thing to come by. So it does take time, and time is super valuable in an incident. The more that you can kind of buy of it, even if it's only 24 hours, 48 hours, sometimes that can be a real lifeline. And so, yeah, I think the thing is just don't panic. Get the right expertise. You're less likely to panic if you've practiced it before, as we've said, a number of times. But I guess there's a broader point here, and maybe we'll come on to it, which is about the ability of these regulators to actually respond to some of these reports. I think it's going to be really interesting for me from a legal perspective to actually see how that plays out. James mentioned over and under reporting. With GDPR, there was huge over reporting, especially in the early days, and a lot of these regulatory authorities were overwhelmed. They just could not keep up with the number of reports coming in. And even now we see that, they're very, I won't call them out specifically as to which regulators, but some regulators you won't hear from at all. Whereas some regulators you'll hear back from in a few days, which is pretty standard with a set of questions, and other regulators will close the investigation before you've even really given them a final report. So again, it's a patchwork quilt, and time will tell. But yeah, it is a challenge. That's all I can say.
Yeah, very interesting. So I think multi-jurisdiction reporting stands out, but surprisingly, the next most selected option is the first one, classifying ICT incident as major incident due to the requirement of that direct qualification, which for me is very interesting, and also incident reporting teams providing input to major incidents. James, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the first one is the one that stands out to me as potentially the most difficult, because classifying successful malicious access is really difficult. Like, if you got a SOC as an example, so Security Operations Center, and they're going to deal with true positives and false positives all of the time. You're going to get things that are going to be alerted to you. How do you understand the context of some of those when it's on the borderline? So you're looking at an alert that might look like there's been some access. How far do you take that? Because when you get to the end of it, you're like, oh, actually, yeah, that was just down to a particular user and they did something. But by that point, you might have already kicked off a whole chain of events that have led to somebody somewhere being notified. So I think the classification of successful malicious access, that's going to be an interesting one that I expect to evolve. I think there needs to be some solid guidance on that, and then see how organizations begin to report on those things and what it is that they're reporting from that very first pivot. What did they say hit that trigger? Yeah. And I'm really interested to see the stats and the trends on what they are, because I expect we'll see some patterns, but I'm expecting to see some outliers where another party might look at that and go, do you know what? I probably wouldn't have classified that as malicious or successful malicious access. So I think that's the one that's going to be interesting from a technical and procedural point of view.
And James, I wouldn't hold your breath necessarily for that detailed guidance. I think like fundamentally it is going to boil down to your own interpretation. And, some of my clients have a more conservative view than others, and they would prefer to notify when maybe I wouldn't. And, I would generally counsel waiting and seeing. It's a judgment call, depends on the incident, depends how in hand you have it. Like if you are struggling under the weight of responding to the incident, actually dealing with your business from an operational standpoint, particularly in the case of a ransomware attack, then, fundamentally, do you want inbound questions from a regulator? Probably not.
Yeah, indeed. I think to both of your point, what I've seen, and we'll possibly you also look at key takeaways, is this decision making is best not to keep within the security function. It is to keep, bring it into the business who would kind of undertake this. That is, I believe, that will possibly allow for that interpretation James Lloyd was referring to, where is this something that really requires a regulatory notification? And I, no offense to security guy, I'm also a security person, but I believe there should be someone outside of the security and the SOC team taking that call. All right, we're gonna quickly give an overview of the complexity involved. We spoke about multi-jurisdiction reporting, which was one of the key challenges, kind of validating that. One of the key reasons for it is every competent authority has its own way of getting the incidents reported to them. So in Germany, you need to have a MVP portal access. In CSSF, you can send an email or through an API access. Again, different processes to report. So if you are operating in multi-jurisdiction, you have a centralized cybersecurity function. How do you manage these variations? Who sits on the top of it? Are your incident response plan geared to kind of provide that sort of guidance for people? And so all of that is going to be challenged. In Sweden, for example, they're going to start off with an Excel based reporting. Their systems are whenever they are ready, it would be ready, and then they are going to report on that. DNB has not yet provided the exact approach, or at least I've not seen it. NBB, you need to report it, and they already asked for a dummy report to be submitted before the 17th deadline, which was again very strange. I've not seen that approach being taken by the regulator before. So it kind of validates the survey results also that we had undertaken previously. I again, what for the people who have joined in, if how happy are they about the communications they have received from their competent authorities about how to report? Have they just made an FAQ page, no real one-to-one communication or an email? How has your experience been? Yeah, we see a significant number of people saying initiatives have not been well communicated. Yeah, most of them. There are though significant amount of people who have also chosen A and B, which is, I think, then kudos to those competent authorities who've done a good job so far. Interesting. We would want to kind of provide an overview of key recommendations and takeaway. Before that, we have one more poll. Uh, it's great to get these insights even from the audience, because you are seeing something, how they are also perceiving this. So it's great that you are participating. Thank you for all the participation. This has enabled us to make this conversation even nuanced based on your inputs. So when was the tabletop exercise conducted? And hopefully it was in order to prepare for the requirements of incident reporting. Yeah, most number of respondents have indicated that they have undertaken it within the last year, which is great. We wait a couple of seconds to close. Yes, still significant amount of people. There are few who have indicated that they've done it more than 2 years ago, and few what is tabletop. I'm hoping it's more of a joke, but there are a number of organizations that have undertaken tabletop, which I think James kind of also corroborates what you've been saying, and even James Lloyd in terms of testing it.
Yeah, there's a trend that we can't capture there because it would make the poll really, really difficult. But I'd be interested to know what different departments made up the audiences and participants for those tabletops. Who have you traditionally been bringing in? Has it just been technical people? Has it just been the C-suite? Or has it been a mix of participants from across the business? Because I think when we look at how broad DORA is, that's something you've got to consider is, are you getting the right people in the room when you're practicing these things? But that's really difficult to get out in a poll. I appreciate it.
Yep. And if you have comments on what James just asked, please drop in a chat. We are happy to take in. And also, if you have any questions, don't wait until the end. Shoot them up. And James Lloyd, from your point of view, seeing most organizations undertake, at least within a year, I think it's great that the clients are trying to gear up.
Definitely great. Yeah, it's encouraging news. And I think as well, working for a US law firm, you see both sides of the pond quite literally. And over the past couple of years, whether it's related to the rush of legislation from Europe or what, I don't know, but there is now, more of an effort to undertake preparedness work and readiness work, which I always had associated more with my US clients. So it's great to see. It's encouraging and absolutely necessary. Of course, like the exercises are only good as the lessons that you kind of draw from them, right? Like, so if you're just kind of doing this exercise and then not really kind of going back to your plan and figuring out, what you could do better, then maybe that's something else that you need to think about.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and possibly fits well into our summary slides. James, I'll throw it up to you. What's your recommendation and guidance for people who have joined in on meeting the reporting obligations?
Yeah, so we've obviously hit the drum quite heavy on the practicing and getting involved in exercises. The other thing that I would look at is around your incident response plans and your risk management frameworks. how often are you reviewing those, making sure that they're up to date as the business changes? Because as an organization, you might change radically over the period of a year, the period of 6 months. Are you making sure that your processes and procedures and your incident response plans are matching up? And also looking at other types of documentation or processes or frameworks, if it's going to be the legal compliance side of things, if it's going to be with your third-party frameworks, do you have the right agreements in there to allow you to be able to get the information that you would need? I've seen in incidents in the past when there might have been an indication that an incident could have originated from a third party. When you go to ask for that information from the third party, they say, "Oh, no, there's no way you're having that." And that could be because there aren't the right provisions in the contract or whatever it may be, like a right to audit, maybe, something along those lines. And then appropriate automation for getting hold of data, putting your hands on it. So when we're looking at having to answer some initial questions within the 4 hours and then a lot more potentially within the 72 hours, are you making the most of the tools at your disposal to get that information quickly? Are you practicing that? Are you rehearsing it? Not just from the people and the processes, but the technology perspective. Do you have the right things in place to be able to pull that data back? And a lot of people will find when they actually look that they already have these things. They already have lots of capability. If they've got, an E5 license for their M365 suite, there's a lot of compliance tools and reporting tools within that. Have you actually looked at that? Have you actually taken a look that you're getting bang for buck out of what you already have? And then also the training around keeping people up to date, making people aware of what their roles and responsibilities are from a procedural and technical point of view.
Great. James Lloyd, before I chime you in on your thoughts for this one, we have a question. What practices have you seen with respect to the notification periods for ICT providers? Example, if the financial institution has to report within 24 hours, then providers need to report within shorter period. So do you have any view on that?
Yeah, well, I think the question, so it's about the difficulty that James just described, I think, in terms of getting information from suppliers, right? So fundamentally, if you're DORA compliant, like hopefully you've done the work on your contracting piece, or your legal department has done the work on the contracting piece to ensure that the requirements are in there for suppliers to give you the information that you need in order to make that report. Whether or not they comply with that provision is kind of anyone's guess. In terms of what I see, I see a mixed bag. So you'll have some providers who are willing to share, who are more open, perhaps concerned about loss of a big account, and you'll have other providers who are just a closed book because they worry about the damage to their reputation. So getting information from those suppliers can be particularly tricky. And ultimately, when you're in the incident and you're up against those kinds of timelines, you don't have the luxury of being able to go to court and ask for an injunction to enforce an agreement. Those things are just not possible. And so it may be that, if you are in a position where you feel that you need to make a notification, you're just having to explain in the notification that you do not have the information because the supplier has not yet provided it to you, but you are working to get it. And that's a perfectly reasonable approach, provided, of course, as I say, that you have the requirements in the contract to force the provider to provide you with that information. But yeah, a regulator will understand, provided that you express it in the correct way.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's very difficult to put a number in place, which I'm assuming Diego was alluding to. The reporting obligation still sits at the financial entities, and in terms of reporting it back to the regulator, the requirement that are there in the minimum contractual terms is for ICT third parties to report as soon as possible. So I guess It's when you have determined that there is an incident that is impacting the financial entity, you should report it as soon as possible and let them determine whether that is material or not from their point of view and requires further notification to the competent authorities. But it kind of is a great question linked to the contract part, which kind of James was referring to. What would be your key takeaways as we shortly hit the hour mark? James Lloyd, I'll want you to chime in.
I'll try not to steal one off the slide. I think the biggest thing that comes away for me, I'm going to do it anyway. It is it's related to cross-departmental collaboration, unfortunately, because I think that I see too much of incident response plans being prepared in isolation by security teams without the benefit of other departments that are going to be necessary to make the determination as to whether an incident is major or not. And if you're doing it in that splendid isolation, you guarantee that you are not going to have the right information and you are not going to make the necessary correct determination when it comes to notifying or not, which means inevitably you're either not reporting when you ought to be, or maybe you're reporting when you don't need to, and that invites regulatory scrutiny when you don't need it. So again, like this is one, because of its broad scope, really needs to be socialized broadly as well.
Yep. James, from your point of view?
Well, we've said it a lot around testing, looking at incident response plan, performing the right types of tabletop exercises. But I think something you can take advantage of. So it's a session that we had, I think, earlier this week or last week around the TLPT, so the threat-led penetration testing. When you're going through those things and you're looking at the outputs of those, take the opportunity to assume that that was a real incident. What would you do if that threat-led penetration test had hit on any of the criteria that they've managed to get through, that they've managed to compromise critical data or key systems? Take that as an opportunity to practice what you would do if you were going to report that, because then you kind of kill in two birds with one stone. So that's something that I would bring together and kind of still hammer home the focus on practice, because you do not want the first time that you do this to be when the house is well and truly on fire. That's absolutely critical.
Super. From my point of view, just most organizations that we work with, they rely on external partners to support through this phase. Again, it's because they bring in very specific competencies, like James Lloyd brings in experience of doing regulatory notification. So it's important that you've already identified those partners that you want when shit hits the fan. So I would kind of also request the audience to kind of look at it. If they already have existing partners, great. If not, try to find one. So that is how I would like to close in. We are at the top of the hour. I'd like to thank James Lloyd first for kind of joining us on this session. Really appreciate your insights that you've shared. Thank you so much, James. Again, as usual, brilliant sharing your insights and experience. For all the people who've joined in, appreciate you responding to a lot of polls. There were too many questions, so thank you so much. If you have any additional questions, do not hesitate to reach out to any one of us. The slides will be shared. You will have emails of James Lloyd, me, and James Thoburn. So do reach out in case if you have any questions or clarifications. As always, thank you. See you next week. Have a good evening. Bye.